So we've just come through a kind of weird year with lockdown and COVID and vaccinations and travel bans and all sorts of craziness. Obviously, it's difficult for early stage companies to do business at the best of times, but given what we've been through, do you think innovation has been happening, and not just innovation pertaining to COVID response, but innovation per se? Do you sense that that's still happening in early stage and growth stage companies?
I think it is. We see a lot of pitches, and obviously we turn down the majority of them, as most venture capitals do. And we're seeing some very interesting angles. A lot of them are COVID related, as you would imagine, but I think innovation continues to happen in companies, in all companies, right? And it's the great ones that do it well, despite the difficulties that they might have. So clearly remote working, I think, is one area that has hampered some of the process of that in-person interaction, right? So you get a lot of people when you can be in the same room and you can talk about things and try and move things quickly. So I think innovation might have slowed a little bit in the nature of having to connect and communicate with people, but I still deeply believe it is happening, and I'm seeing it every day in the pitches that I'm hearing in all areas. Particularly, if you look at the advertising side, I heard a very interesting podcast pitch out of Los Angeles last night, and where they talked about distributed content and niche content and influencers. Very, very interesting space. How podcast and audio is becoming quite a big space. That's coming out of people's need as well to keep themselves entertained in different ways. And clearly that's ballooning right now. That was something that was already building over the last 4 or 5 years. But the impetus of where we are is driving more innovation in that sector.
Which is a good segue into the nature of interesting tech that's emerging. From your experience and the type of pitches that you get, and the pitches that end up a term sheet certainly, or potentially even investment, what's kind of cool and, I was going to say cool and hot. That doesn't make any sense.
I know what you mean.
But you know what I mean. What's happening? What's hot now in these weird markets that's still cutting through, really, in terms of impressing potential investors?
Yeah, again, I don't want to speak for the whole industry because everybody's got their space and their size of their business. We're fairly young in our growth stage, and we're fairly specific about the businesses that we invest in for the reason that the founders are important to us. So we want to work with founders that we like, and we want to enjoy that journey together while having good outcomes for them and for us ultimately. But we're seeing lots of innovation pitches that talk about fixing business processes. I think one of the things that I see overall is that legacy businesses clearly, and I've been in this industry about 20 years, as you mentioned, and I spent a lot of time early on with Google trying to convince traditional industries to move to Google and to search and to the thing that was coming, and there was a lot of resistance. I think there's still been resistance, and so while COVID's been horrific for the world and for most of us, it has accelerated, of course, digital transformation, and that is welcome because we're seeing innovation come at a much faster rate. And I hear terms like, it's taken 5, 7, 8 years of where businesses might have been, they've had to accelerate that innovation. So we're seeing a lot of interesting technology around supply chain, improving the supply chain. Blockchain is very interesting about security and authenticity. And we're seeing people want to, and of course the climate is a big issue, right? So we're seeing a lot of people wanting to do their bit while having great businesses that solve consumer problems or business problems. And so I think the legacy of innovation, of bad innovation in these legacy businesses has accelerated, and they are seeing a demand for solutions that help them to get there quicker. So everybody's kind of got their skates on and needing to move. And so the demand is increasing massively, where technology used to be this thing, a sector out of the global world. It's now the underpinning of the global economy, and you can't move away from it, you can't escape it. So if you try to hide as a business, you have to now use technology in some context. And so we try to find businesses that do that and help businesses to accelerate quicker and find solutions to improve maybe legacy business processes and get there quicker, like Buzzy Buzz in the low code area, where we're seeing huge opportunity. Mobile app development has got a 5x increase. There are not enough developers and coders in the world. They're only 0.5% of the global population. You need citizen development, which is what low code does, to allow people to develop on the fly with drag and drop applications that are instantly mobile, instead of having to go through the process of IT or the dev cycle, which could be 6 or 12 months. So I think we're seeing the cycle of business move a lot quicker, and everyone having to remote work, etc., has brought technology to the fore, and people are now much more comfortable in these areas and using online systems as well.
You almost sense that there is a kind of schism developing in tech as well, in that it's kind of the establishment approach versus the rest. This probably manifests itself in terms of blockchain and distributed ledger technologies versus centralized systems. And of course, you come from the Google world, which is all about centralization and more services being heaped on top of that individual customer relationship or corporate relationship. And then, of course, you've got the decentralized world, which is kind of pegged to libertarianism and some grandiose ideologies, this seems to have been accelerated, this schism, really during lockdown, doesn't it? And there is a kind of competing world of tech, centralized versus decentralized, increasingly, and the arguments and the product messaging around some of these technologies is a bit nuanced.
I mean, I think there was always that walled garden approach. If you think about kind of 1.0 in the 2000s, right, the AOL model and the walled garden. In a sense, Google and Facebook, while they've looked open, have created their own walled gardens by locking people in, through the result of giving benefit for data, for example, and getting people to give something away in order to get a benefit to do that. The freemium model, of course, has driven huge uptake and the ability for them then to use that data. I think there was always the opportunity there. But without machine learning, for example, which has come on leaps and bounds in the last few years, I remember speaking, at conferences 4 or 5 years ago, where it was like this big thing. Not even 3 or 4 years ago, people were scared of it. They weren't sure what it did. The machine learning and AI is so much a part of the ability for us to execute quickly that you have to be using that technology to move that. But I think the democratization, as you're saying, is moving away from that distributed part. I see it in enterprise, where what I'm seeing is people creating ecosystems in order to make some businesses thrive. So the open APIs and the ability to work with other systems, everyone's kind of by default saying, here's my product, it's open, like plug in, right? Because we'll create something better together than I can by myself with my thousands of engineers. So I think there's a great idea, there's a product market fit, there's a consumer need or business need for that. But I think the big change is open systems, marketplaces that allow other businesses to plug in order to thrive as well. So I think we're creating more and more ecosystems for businesses, which is great.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that AI is definitely going in that direction, where there's more and more kind of off-the-shelf solutions that can plug directly into hybrid solutions to offer an enhanced user experience.
Yeah. And with anything, when you stop talking about the technology, then it's embedded, right? So like we talked about machine learning and AI because people didn't really understand it, but now it's a baseline that's built into stuff that allows us to just move a lot quicker and a lot more innovatively. So I think that will become more embedded and will enable faster development, distribution, and impact in terms of the work that we do.
Now, if I can touch just briefly on foreign investment, and you're part of an international network. Admittedly, it's relatively small at the minute, but it's growing, and your investments grow over time. But you've certainly got a foot in the US, in Australia, in the UK, and other markets. But in terms of that wonderful thing that was happening prior to all of this madness in last March, of companies migrating and developing in other markets. We had a huge number of companies coming from Australia, for example, and certainly the US. US by far the biggest tech market for UK inward investment. My first question is: has that stopped, or is it simply delayed? You know, that is there a big backlog of FDI opportunities? And secondly, how good is the UK government in terms of the services it provides in welcoming those companies and allowing them to do business? Because I sense that you maybe have some comments to make about the levels of bureaucracy associated with all of that.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we are global. You know, we operate in, as you said, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, the UK, South Africa, and America. We focused. You know, I'm working at the moment on bringing, and we have been internationalizing OCR Labs, which is an ID verification business that focuses around identity and onboarding users onto whatever platform that may be in highly regulated, if not unregulated markets, banking, for example, financial services, etc. So each country has their own version of what they need on a regulation basis. I think we are starting to see some broader regulation, things like GDPR and obviously the Californian privacy law and everything else that's coming out of it, EIDAS, etc. So there are some standards that are being adopted globally, and I think that's enabling people to scale internationally. So I think there is development. I think there are incentives for businesses to launch in the UK. It's definitely a great market still, an opportunity to go into Europe and an opportunity to go into America, right? So it's that middle ground, which has always been appealing to companies coming from both East and West. But I think Brexit and some aspects of that are not as good. I mean, the UK government talks about, you know, welcome, come in, bring your employees, innovate, build your tech here, but they make it quite difficult bureaucratically to actually scale and build things. The banking sector, you can't get an account, for example, if you're a new international business, because you don't have the credibility and the history. They need to align some of that. On the OCR Lab side, where we see massive innovation and massive change in thinking around identity particularly, and I think COVID, we can't help but recognize that COVID, the need for identity and persistent identity or re-identity and security and fraud, and obviously stopping fraud particularly, is escalated. I mean, fraud in the UK, I think was up 150% year on year to April last year in fraud in the UK alone. And you'll see similar stats in different countries. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing a lot of that happen, and the government acknowledges that the current systems are not in a decent state to be able to deal with that. So the DCMS has taken a little bit more of a focus in the UK, for example, and they're now trying to commercialize identity and bring something up to speed and to set a framework for the future. So yes, there are absolutely opportunities. I've hired remotely. I haven't met people. It's something I never thought I'd do, and I used to do face-to-face interviews like all of us. You could never hire somebody without seeing them. You know, it's absolutely all there. Places like Fiverr and Upwork, you can get services. So online is allowing you to operate without having a physical infrastructure, and you just have to be a little bit more specific and recalibrate your sites as to what your expectations are and what you can deliver. But you know, we need to constantly get support from the government to improve this and open the channels, particularly now after Brexit, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting space as well that you're in the identity space too, in that I think governments haven't been very good at it, at establishing citizen identity. And in the case of the UK government, gov.verify didn't really have much uptake or adoption. No. And there were multiple suppliers and different standards. So I think they now see that as being an issue, and they put out a consultation on that as well, haven't they?
They have, yeah. But you're seeing it in the, for example, the land registry. They want to drive innovation around identity as well, fraud, because they're being defrauded through this period. The Companies House saw massive fraud on bounce back loans and people setting up companies, taking loans, and then closing companies down, and they had no handle on it. You know, this has to be gotten a hold of and dealt with in a more decent way. The government is having impact. The taxpayer clearly is having impact because they're the ones who foot the bill at the end of the day. So this has to be fixed. And fraud is a real problem for the internet, particularly with the proliferation of services and how we're all forced to now access areas remotely. There is some essential change that needs to happen. For example, if you want to sign a mortgage, you know, and you need the old days of you have to come into the branch, we have to look at you in the face. That's gone. We need to change and innovate around doing that. And that will change for employment, for example. Healthcare will change. We're seeing a lot of innovation around insurance and healthcare, you know, using using remote verification in order to allow those processes to work a lot quicker. Because the bureaucracy I referred to earlier of these legacy businesses who had lots of people and lots of paperwork and things to do to fulfill something are gone. You know, we can't have that kind of people. You got that amount of people in order to do that, and you need technology to enable it. We're not saying get rid of people. We're just saying make it better and faster, more fluid.
You're suggesting too that the nature of technology and technology innovation is at the increment. You know that technology often results in relatively small establishes itself. You know, we can look back and say, oh goodness, you know, things are so much better now than they used to be because of those incremental changes. There are, however, discussions and moves towards fairly radical change, you know, and I'm thinking here about like net zero initiatives and, you know, Build Back Better and the Gates inspired initiatives to say, well, actually, no, the way we did business in the past is no longer acceptable. We have to do business like this. What's your view in terms of that kind of global reset kind of approach to tech?
Well, you know, the big tech businesses have to do the right thing. There's no doubt. I think they all know that, and that will drive the change. But you know, as we increase machine learning, for example, we need more data centers because you can't produce more if you don't have more machines. And if you produce more machines, you're leaving a bigger footprint. So that's essential. You know, I've read, I'm in the process of reading Bill Gates' new book about the climate, the net zero opportunity. The investment needs to happen 20 years in advance in order to create economies, factories, businesses that are net neutral on carbon, for example, and to save the planet. That if that doesn't happen now by governments and by industry, we're going to be in real trouble. So I think it's essential. Like we have no way out. But the people are leading, who have the money, need to invest back in and enable their partners in the ecosystem to make sure that they don't have to make difficult and bad decisions about having an impact on the planet and on people as a whole.
Okay. And the other criticism of big tech relates to, you know, suppression of freedom of speech. You know, as more people get onto these platforms, and obviously a lot of the platforms are dependent on advertising revenue. You're an ex-Googler, you know this is as much as anybody. Do you think that paradigm is going to change in future? Are we going to move increasingly away from ad-dependent revenues for big tech and more focused on just selling systems and services for payment rather than subvented by advertising?
I think so. I mean, if you look at commerce, right? I mean, more of us are shopping online. So clearly, there's more. We're doing more online. We're shopping online. We're buying more online. So I think it needs to move away from that. Ads, you know, I'm an ad man. I'm a marketer. I love advertising. You know, clearly, Google and Facebook and others have built their business on ads. I don't know if it's sustainable if the ads are not relevant. Just like any advertising platform, as long as the ads relate to what you want to do and they're not intrusive, and you feel like they're useful, then I think advertising will always persist as a model. But there clearly has to be some diversion away from relying wholly on advertising as a revenue stream. And I think that's why you see Facebook investing in their own currency, in commerce, Instagram, of course, shopping online. So you're seeing all these big tech realize that advertising per se cannot exist as an only, as the simple only model for them to survive. They have to move beyond that. And I think they'll invest in much wider initiatives. So I'm hoping that advertising doesn't remain the dominant model for them to continue to survive. I don't know the impact yet on what that would mean for consumers, but clearly there's a trade-off always, right? Whether it's your data or your advertising in order to get the services that you need. But I think a paradigm has to shift there.
So what would your final piece of advice be for a company or an entrepreneur who might be considering pitching from some investment from you? What is it that in this sort of emerging new normal for tech that they need to really be thinking about before putting together a pitch deck?
Yeah, listen, I mean, we listen to everyone. We're happy, again, for us, you know, the rules of engagement for Halkin Ventures is early stage, so we pretty much seed capital. We are happy to support, the building of an MVP all the way through to scale up or acceleration. But we are a venture build model, and so we're there to support founders with additional services to make sure that they can stay on the track to do the right things, and we can help them reach whatever their goal is. There's innovation everywhere. We see it in offline businesses, online businesses. We're not tech exclusive. I know this is a tech audience, but there's innovation everywhere, and the ability to build that, I'd say, for an entrepreneur is, take the chance, back yourself, and keep on working and keep on innovating, and then look for partners who can just support you in the goals you want. You need to decide who you want to be there with you at your side to support you, and that's the kind of people that we are. We're not just money men. You can get money anywhere. It's freely accessible now. Anybody can raise money. It's what you need at that point and the support that you need to make yourself successful to go to the next stage. So hoping there's lots out there. I'm excited about the future, and I'm excited about the economy, and particularly about the UK. I think there's lots of opportunity.
Russ, thank you very much indeed for joining us and providing such valuable insights. And I wish you all the success with your current and future investments.
It's always a pleasure talking to you, Jeff. Thank you. I appreciate the time.
Thank you very much indeed.